Okay, let's start. We can start with the prayers. You can repeat after me. Om Sada Shiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambham karishyami Siddhir bhavatu me sada Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Namah Shivaya.
All right, let's start. So last class we started Tattva Bodha and we said the meaning of the word Tattva Bodha means the knowledge about reality of my own self. So knowing about who am I, that is the meaning of the word Tattva Bodha. Tattva is reality, Bodha is knowledge. Now, in the last class, we raised an important question, which is why to study Tattva Bodha, right? Before we do any activity, we will ask the question, why should I do this? What is the benefit of doing this? Only if it has some benefit, then it is worth doing, right? Otherwise, it's just a waste of time. So you have to ask the question, why to study Tattva Bodha? And we discussed some points of that. Now, in life, any activity that you do, anything that you pick up to do, what is the main reason for that? Why do you do anything at all in life?
Happiness.
Happiness, right? You can call it happiness, you can call it peace, you can call it comfort, you can call it relief, you can call it by any name, but ultimately we just want to feel happy. So we do a lot of things in life, right? We go on vacations, we earn money, we finish our education, we pick up different activities, we get into relationships, we get out of relationships, all of this just to feel happy. Now, what is the problem with that happiness? The problem is that it comes and goes, right? It is not permanent. It is temporary. It is coming and going. Another problem is that it is dependent on the objects of the world. If the object is there, I'm happy. If object goes away, my happiness also goes away. So what do we want to do? We want to convert this happiness into a permanent kind of happiness. And converting this temporary happiness into a permanent happiness, that is moksha. Okay, converting this dependent happiness into an independent happiness, that is moksha. So if somebody asks you, why are you studying Tattva Bodha? The answer is, I want moksha. The purpose of the study is moksha. Now, if they ask what exactly is moksha, Then we discussed in the last class these 5 benefits of moksha, right? What exactly is moksha? These 5 points in full measure, that is moksha. And these 5 points, what are they? 3 of them are getting rid of something, and 2 of them are gaining something. So in moksha, you lose or you remove 3 things. And what are they? The first one is you remove the curiosity. The curiosity of life. What is life? Why am I here? What is the purpose of all this? So all these fundamental questions that we have, those questions are answered, and knowing these answers gives a big relief, and with that there is a lot of peace in the mind. So it removes the fundamental curiosity that we have. What is the second thing we get rid of? We get rid of desperation. We get rid of dependence. So right now we are dependent on objects of the world. We cling on to objects of the world for our comfort, for our happiness. But with this Atmajnanam, there is no more desperate clinging. If the object is there, I will enjoy it. But if it is not there, then also it is okay. That freedom from desperation comes. And the third thing we get rid of is the trauma from all the shocking events of life. So whenever bad things happen, tragedies happen in life, people get traumatized, right? This knowledge, this Atmajnanam, acts as a cushion to absorb that shock. So you are protected from this trauma, from all the shock in the world. So you get rid of these 3 things and you gain 2 things. What are they? Happiness. And this happiness is born from this knowledge, from the self-knowledge. And so it is a very subtle kind of happiness, a very intimate kind of happiness. And what else do you gain? You gain efficiency. In whatever you do, there is control, there is efficiency. You are able to do what you are supposed to do in the best way possible. So these are the 5 benefits of moksha. Now everyone wants this, right? This is what we keep striving for. We don't want to be shocked or disturbed by the world, and we want to carry on with life as happily, as efficiently as possible. And so this is a simple, demystified definition of moksha. Okay. Now, the next question that comes up is, okay, I am convinced that I want moksha, but how do I get it? What is the way to get moksha? So there is only one way to get moksha, and that is through Atmajnanam, self-knowledge. There is no other way to get moksha. No meditation, no pranayama, no hatha yoga, no bhakti, nothing else will give you moksha. Only Atmajnanam will give you moksha. Okay, there is a lot of detailed, involved arguments about why this is the case, but the answer is that only Atmajnanam gives you moksha. Self-knowledge is the only remedy. Now, where do I get this self-knowledge? Right? I have to acquire it from somewhere. Is it available in the school textbooks? Do parents teach this at home? Can I learn it on YouTube? Where do I get? What is the source of this Atmajnanam? So Atmajnanam is from the Vedas. Okay, it is from the scriptures. This is the only source of Atmajnanam, and this we accept as pramanam for moksha. Okay, so this is the path. This is how we reach moksha. Now, we have to understand the layout of the scriptures, right? So now, since we are entering into the scriptures, we have to understand the organization and classification a little bit. So today we will be seeing that first. The first, what you see, this chart over here, which says the classification of the traditional Hindu religious systems. So this left side part of the chart, it is called as Shad Darshana. You may have heard the word Shad Darshana. Shad means 6, Darshana means viewpoint or perspective. So 6 types of viewpoints. On what? On the Vedas. So basically, the Shaddarshanas, they have interpreted the Vedas in 6 different ways, and that is why we have 6 different schools of thought. Okay, so it is all based on the same Veda, but they have interpreted slightly differently from the same Veda. And that is why 6 different schools of thought are there. So these schools are called as Astika schools. Astika means that they accept the Vedas. Okay, they accept the supremacy of Vedas. They accept that Veda is Pramanam. And based on the Vedas, they have come up with the whole philosophy, the whole school of thought. And what are those 6? Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva Mimamsa, and Uttara Mimamsa. 6 types are there. And this is just to show you where we stand. Okay, we come under Uttara Mimamsa, the Vedantic knowledge. So we are not going to go into detailed explanation of each of these. We are not here to look into detailed analysis of the others. This is just an overview to show you where we stand exactly. So the important one for us is this Mimamsa. Mimamsa means inquiry. Okay, and so in inquiry, we are inquiring into the Vedas basically. So Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa. Purva Mimamsa means the first portion of the Vedas, the former portion of the Vedas. And that includes all the Vedic hymns and rituals. So all the rituals that we see, they belong to the Purva portion of the Vedas. The another name for this Purva portion is called Karma Kanda. So Karma Kanda is the Purva Veda, the first portion of the Veda. The second section, the last section of the Veda is Vedanta, Veda Anta, the end of the Vedas, meaning the last section of the Vedas, that is called as Upanishads. It is also called as Jnana Kanda. And here they are calling it Uttara Mimamsa, inquiry into the latter portion of the Vedas, which is nothing but the Vedantic knowledge. So that is where we are. And in that also there are different schools. Within Vedanta also there are some more different schools with small differences in their understanding. We are Advaita Vedanta. Advaita means non-dual. We do not accept that there are 2 principles or that there are 2 entities. For us, there is only one entity. Okay, that is why Advaita, non-dual. There are other schools that accept a duality, but we do not accept any duality. What is the meaning of duality and why we don't accept? We will see as the course goes on. Okay. Now, this is about the Astika schools, that is those schools that accept Vedas. Then on the right side, we have the Nastika schools. These are schools that don't accept the Vedas. So under that, we have Charvaka, Jainism, and Buddhism. So some of the philosophies, teachings, principles, they will be a little similar to this Hinduism, but they are classified under Nastika because they do not accept the Vedas. Okay, so Jainism and Buddhism, I'm sure you've all heard, they're famous religions and prevalent even today. But Charvaka is one of those schools that has died out long back. It is basically a very materialistic kind of philosophy. They do not accept Atma, they don't accept Punarjanma, that is life after this life. They don't accept anything except what they see. So they say what you see is reality and you have only this one life. You are this body, so you might as well just enjoy. So eat a lot and be merry. That is their philosophy. Okay, so this is about the Nastika schools. And we come under Astika. We accept Vedas and we come under Uttara Mimamsa, the latter portion, inquiry into the latter portion of the Vedas. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Where does Sikhism lie in this?
Sikhism is not classified under this, since
Yeah.
they also don't accept Vedas, probably under Nastika itself.
Okay.
I don't know much about Sikhism. Do they accept Vedas?
For them it is the Granth Sahib,
Yeah,
but
so then in
there are
that case,
shlokas
Nastika.
from it. There are shlokas from it which talk about Krishna and his teachings also.
It would still be under Nastika because Krishna is not Vedas, no?
Yeah.
Remember, see, in Hindi, Astika and Nastika means belief in God and not believing in God. Here it is
Yes.
not God. Here it is Vedas. That is the
Okay.
difference. You have to remember.
Yeah.
So Medhaji, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas and the Samhita belong to the Purva Veda.
Yeah, those three together are Purva Veda or the Karma Kanda portion, and the Upanishad is the Vedanta, the latter portion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Vedaji, you'll tell us where Tattva Bodha comes, isn't?
Yeah. So under this Uttara Mimamsa, under Vedanta, we again have three main layers of scriptures. The source of this Atmajnanam. So if you ask where is Atmajnanam available, the source of self-knowledge, we have three layers. The first is called Veda or Shruti. Veda or Shruti, both words mean the same thing. They are referring to Vedas. So Shruti is just another name for Veda. This is the original source of the knowledge, the original source. Okay. Now, it is not written by anybody. This you have to remember, that the Vedas are not authored by anybody. They are not written, and it is not a human creation. Okay, so Vedas are said to be apaurushaya. Apaurushaya means not of human origin, not created by the human mind. So this Veda is heard by the rishis in their deep meditation. So it is revealed to them. Okay, it is discovered by them. It is not created by them. This we have to remember. So it is like, you have a radio, and if you tune your radio properly, it catches certain signals, right? And then you get music. So in something similar way, when the rishis are attuned in their deep meditation, the Vedas are revealed to them. So it comes through them, not from them. Okay. So this is Veda. This is the original source. The next layer of literature is called as Smriti. Smriti literally means that which is remembered. So all of these are teachings that are based on Shruti. So these Smriti are authored by rishis, but the original content belongs to Shruti. Okay, so whatever is taught in Shruti, based on that, the rishis have authored Smriti. Okay, so one of the examples of Smriti is our Bhagavad Gita, authored by a rishi, but the content, the main teaching is from Veda.
Excuse me, ma'am. Veda means it is. It comes to them after self-realization or during meditation.
During meditation.
Thank you.
Okay. So Smriti is that which is remembered, meaning that which is remembered from Shruti. Shruti literally means that which is heard. Smriti means that which is remembered. So what is remembered from the teachings of Shruti, and then they have presented it in a slightly different way. Okay, the original content is still belonging to Veda. Then there is a third, one more layer, Brahma Sutrani, Brahma Sutras, also called as Nyaya Prasthana. Okay, Brahma Sutras, another a name for it we call as Nyaya Prasthana. So in Brahma Sutra, there is a lot of supporting arguments, lot of supporting logic, reasoning given for statements of Shruti. So you can say it is kind of a supporting reasoning, supporting logic. Remember, I say supporting, not verifying and not proving. Okay, nothing can ever prove statements of Shruti. It is only a supporting statement. All right. So they use tarka, that is logic and reasoning. Tarka and nyaya, logic, reasoning, to support what is mentioned in Shruti. To support, explain, debate, all of this is dealt in Brahma Sutra. Okay, and these three together is what is called as Prasthana Trayam. You may have heard the word Prasthana Trayam, the three foundational literature of Vedanta is Prasthana Trayam. And what are those three? Shruti, Smriti, and Brahma Sutras. Now, other than these three, there is a fourth layer of literature called Prakaranam or Prakarana Grantham. This Prakaranam are texts that are written by later acharyas, of course, based on the original teaching of Shruti, but presented in a different way for the modern audience. Okay, they have to change the teaching, give new, they cannot change the teaching, but they have to change the methodology of teaching, right? They have to give new examples, they have to use a different language, maybe reorder certain things for better presentation. So all of this can be explored in Prakaranam. And these are texts that have been written by later acharyas. And Tattva Bodha is one such Prakarana Grantham. So if you go directly to Shruti, a lot of word meanings are not available or not explained there, and it may not be in the correct systematic order. So in Tattva Bodha, the word meanings are explained and it is explained in a systematic order. And also the language barrier is overcome, right? All these texts are available in Sanskrit, but presently we are teaching in English. If one of the acharyas writes a book in English, that will also become a Prakaranam. So all of these barriers can be overcome. And that is why Prakaranam is also available. Yes.
Medhaji, what is the difference between Smriti and Prakaranam?
Smritis are written by the rishis. Prakaranam are written by later acharyas.
But both are written on the principles of Shruti.
Yes.
Okay.
Prakaranams can be introductory level texts, or they can even be advanced text. For example, Viveka Chudamani is a kind of a advanced Prakaranam. Smriti, we have, for example, Bhagavad Gita, Manu Smriti, all these things.
Okay.
Medhaji, one question, please.
Yeah.
One of the Shat Darshanas you just said was Nyaya. Is the Nyaya based on the Brahma Sutrani?
No, that Nyaya and this Nyaya are different.
Logic and discriminative faculty?
No. This Nyaya, that Nyaya are two different. The word is same, but they are referring to two different things.
All right. Thank you.
This is Nyaya Prasthana, that is Nyaya Darshana.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now we have understood that Tattva Bodha is a Prakarana Grantham, and why we have picked up Tattva Bodha specifically to study is because it explains what is called as Paribhasha. You may have heard this word Paribhasha. Paribhasha means, yeah.
Medhaji, so Brahma Sutranis have been authored by rishis as well?
It is authored by Vyasacharya.
Okay, thank you.
So, yes, why we have picked up Tattva Bodha specifically to begin with is because Tattva Bodha introduces the whole teaching in a very systematic manner, in a very comprehensive way. It covers all the topics in a very brief but beautiful way, giving all the technical definitions. If you directly enter into Bhagavad Gita or Upanishads, lot of words will be used which we don't know the meanings of. For example, words like karma, words like moksha, words like atma. Many different words are there which can have multiple different meanings, right? And those word meanings we have to be very clear about. For example, satyam and mithya, right? Satyam in general colloquial understanding means truth, but in Vedanta, satyam is not referring to truth, right? So these words, this technical definition, technical understanding is called as paribhasha, the jargon, the technical jargon of a field. If you go to any field, you will have words very specific in that field that mean something in that field, right? If you take the word bug, for example, generally if you say bug, you're talking about an insect. But if you work in software and you say bug, what does it mean? Error in the computer, right? There's a bug in the code, or there can be a bug on the bed, right? So different contexts, the same word can have different meanings based on different context. And this is called paribhasha, the technical understanding of different words. And this is very elaborately explained in Tattva Bodha. So this is the reason why we have picked up Tattva Bodha first, before Bhagavad Gita. Tattva Bodha is a prerequisite before you study Gita, just to make it easier when you come to Gita to understand what is being talked about there. Okay. Now we will be starting with the text of Tattva Bodha. Those who have the text, you can keep it open and you can make your notes. Before we begin this, any questions about whatever was discussed till now?
Prakaranam Kantham, little doubt. I couldn't. Yes, yes.
Prakaranams are later texts authored by later acharyas to suit the modern audience. They can overcome language barriers. They can overcome the placement, the flow of the text. All these things can be overcome. All the shortcomings of directly entering into the study of Upanishads, those are overcome in Prakaranam. If any acharya of the tradition writes a text today, that will be called as Prakaranam. Of course, it is based on Shruti, based on Vedas, but we do not call those as Smriti or Shruti. We call that as Prakaranam.
Any example we can?
Tattva Bodha.
Okay, okay.
Okay. So shall we start? The main text?
Medhaji, one clarification. Ramayana and Mahabharata were also are also Smriti?
No, they are called as Itihasa, different category.
Okay. Okay.
There's something else called Purana also, okay, but we are not going to look at all that now.
No. I just wanted, but Gita is a part of Mahabharata.
Yes,
so
but
we call that also Itihasa then? No. We
No,
say
Gita-
that is Smriti.
Smriti is what is based on the, the original Shruti. The whole Mahabharata is not talking about the teaching, right? The
No.
whole thing is basically a story. And of course, there is a lot of teaching within that, but not directly talking about Atmagnanam, right?
Okay. Yes.
The Bhagavad Gita is one portion of Mahabharata where Atmagnanam is directly being explained.
Okay.
There are many portions in Mahabharata, not just Bhagavad Gita.
Yes.
Uddhava Gita, Anu Gita, and so many smaller portions that come, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
those all also can be called Smriti.
Fine. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll start with the main text of Tattva Bodha, and we will read this. You can repeat after me. Vasudevendra Yogindram
Vasudevendram
नत्वा ज्ञानप्रदं गुरुम्
Natva
Pradam
मुमुक्षूणां हितार्थाय
Hitaya
तत्त्वबोधोऽभिधीयते So this is the very first line or verse of Tattvabodha. And as you can see, this is in verse form. Verse form means you can kind of sing it, right? And this particular verse is in Anushtup Chandaha. Anushtup Chandaha means every quarter line will have 8 syllables. And so the whole verse will have 8 into 4, 32 syllables. Okay, and that is why you can kind of sing it. And in fact, even Bhagavad Gita, the majority of it is in Anushtup Chandaha. Okay, so it's almost 70% of Bhagavad Gita is in Anushtup Chandaha. Here in Tattvabodha, the very first verse and the very last verse, both of them are in Anushtup Chandaha, and everything else in between is in prose form. Prose form means sentence form, not in in a kind of a poetry way. It is not like that. It is just regular sentence form in Tattvabodha. Now, this very first verse of Tattvabodha is a Prarthana Shloka, a prayer verse, a Mangala Charanam. Okay, so the author is beginning this text with a prayer. Now, why prayer? Right? Because in life, whenever we take up any activity, whenever we start to do anything, there are two things that determine whether that activity will be successful or not. So the first factor is your own effort. Okay, your own effort determines the success or failure of an activity. The second factor is all the other external uncontrollable factors. Right? They also affect whether your action is successful or not. For example, suppose you decide to go out, and you get ready, you've worn your nice clothes and shoes and you've packed your things and everything is ready, and then it starts to rain. Now your effort was in getting ready, but the rain is not in your control. It is an external factor that determines the success of your going out. Now, suppose for this class, I get ready, I've set up everything, I have my notes, I've prepared everything, and then suddenly power goes. That is not in my control, right? So your effort is one part, your prayatna, the effort that you put is one part. And then there is this other external uncontrollable factors. And we call these factors as daivam. The external uncontrollable factors are called as daivam. And this daivam also affects how your activity will go. And you don't want this daivam to become an obstacle to whatever you have chosen to do, right? And that is why we pray. Through prayer, we can alter or even eliminate this daivam. We invoke Ishvara Anugraha, the grace of the Lord, through prayer. And here, the author is also doing the same thing. He has started this project of writing a text called Tattvabodha, and now he's praying so that he can successfully complete writing this text. And now with him, we also pray for successful completion of this course. Okay, and it is important as a seeker to develop a prayerful attitude. In fact, this is a very unique thing about this culture, that we always try to develop a prayerful attitude. You see, in India, before any activity, before we start any major activity, we always pray, right? If you buy a new house, before you start living in that house, you do a big puja and a prayer, right? If a baby is born, you do another kind of puja. If there's a wedding, another kind of puja. Before you go to exam, you see the students, they go to a temple and then they go to the exam hall, right? So a prayerful attitude is to be developed. So we pray for towards anything and everything, right? So this prayerful attitude is important for us to develop as seekers. It calms the mind, it works on the mind, it prepares your mind to receive the knowledge. So it is important to have that prayerful attitude. So here the author has also begun his text with a prayer. Now, who is he addressing in his prayer? So it says here the first word, Vasudevendra Yogindram. He is addressing his guru, whose name is Vasudevendra. Now here in this, in the Vedanta school, and of course in India generally, the guru is considered equal to God. There is no difference between guru and God. So a prayer to guru is equivalent to a prayer to Ishvara, to Bhagwan. So the author has begun his text with a prayer to his guru, whose name is Vasudevendra. Now, this here Vasudevendra, Indra suffix is there, right? That indicates that maybe this teacher, this Acharya, is from the Kanchi Parampara, because there in Kanchi Parampara, they have the suffix Indra attached to the end of the name. Interestingly, the author has not mentioned his own name. Okay, we don't know who is the author of Tattvabodha. He has not mentioned his own name. He has just mentioned his guru's name, who is Vasudevendra. So we assume it is one of the acharyas from the Kanchi Parampara. And this Vasudevendra's student is the author of Tattvabodha, whose name is unknown. This is one theory. Okay. The second theory is that Adi Shankaracharya has written Tattvabodha, and when he says Vasudevendra, he is referring to Lord Krishna, because Vasudevendra is another name for Lord Krishna, right? So maybe he is invoking Lord Krishna, and if Adi Shankaracharya is the author. So two theories. If Adi Shankaracharya is the author, then Vasudevendra is referring to Lord Krishna. If Adi Shankaracharya is not the author, then we don't know who is the author. It could be one of the later Shankaracharyas. We don't know who it is, but it seems he had a guru called Vasudevendra, who he is, doing his pranam to before starting this text. Now, who is this Vasudevendra? He has given a description for him. He says, Yogindram. Here, the suffix Indram means great. Okay, here the suffix Indram means great. And what is he? A great yogi. So this Vasudevendra is a great yogi. Now, what kind of yogi? Is he a Hatha yogi, a Raja yogi, Bhakti yogi? What is he? Here, you have to take that he is a Jnana yogi. Means Jnani, an enlightened person. So here the word yogi means the one who is enlightened. So Yogindram means the great enlightened one, the great Jnani. So this Vasudevendra Yogindram, this Acharya Vasudevendra, who is a great Jnani, to him I am offering my prayer before starting this text. That is what the author is telling. Now there's a small subtle point here, couple of small subtle points that we have to note before we go ahead. The author is not claiming any credit for himself. First of all, he has not mentioned his name, right? You don't find these anonymous works these days much. Everybody likes to put their name on everything, right? But here, he has written such an important work, but the author has not claimed any credit. So in this tradition, you will find a lot of texts where the names of the authors are not mentioned. That is because the teaching is more important than the teacher. Teaching is more important than the individual. Okay, so that is one reason. Second, by addressing his guru in this way, he has indirectly told us that this is not my knowledge. I have not created this knowledge. I have not come up with this knowledge. This was just taught to me by my teacher, and I am teaching you in that same way. So indirectly, he is telling that this knowledge has been received from me by the Guru Parampara, from the Guru Parampara. Received by me from Guru Parampara. And there is yet another subtle point he's telling, that you should not be studying Shastra independently by yourself. A guru is necessary to study Shastra. Independent self-study is not advised. Why is that? Because firstly, in Shastra, there will be many places where there will be contradictory statements. There will be conflicting information in many places, totally opposite things. The same text is trying to tell you two opposite things, it will feel like. In those cases, to resolve the conflicts, you require an acharya who understands and who has that overview. The second reason why you require an acharya is because of contextual meanings of Sanskrit words. Every Sanskrit word has multiple meanings. It can have even up to 20, 25, or even more also, some words. And each meaning is quite different. They're not similar meanings. They can be different meanings, and not just different, they can be totally opposite meanings. So same word having two opposite meanings. Now, which meaning will you take if you are reading by yourself? You have to know which meaning to take for the statement to make sense. For that, again, an acharya is required. Okay. And another.
One more thing. What was the first one?
The first one is to resolve any conflicts that arise in the concepts. There'll be many places where contradictory information becomes available, and then you have to know how to resolve. The second is to know which meaning of the Sanskrit word to take. And the third reason for having an acharya is the systematic unfoldment of the teaching. Suppose you decide to start by yourself. The scriptures are very vast. How do you know where to start, which direction to progress, which thing to study next, and how to end it? Where does all this finally resolve into? You need somebody who has that overview. And that is why an acharya becomes necessary. Somebody who knows the steps to be taken. A systematic unfoldment of the scriptures is very necessary for the scripture to work on you and for it to have an impact on you. Otherwise, it is just reading words. If you want the impact, the benefit, it has to be studied under a qualified teacher. Okay, so indirectly, the author is claiming that I have studied from my teacher, and a teacher is necessary for this study. Okay, till here it is clear? Okay. So, Vasudevendra Yogindram, that is Vasudevendra, the Acharya, who is a great yogi, and also Gurum. He is my Guru. The author is telling he is my Guru. And what kind of Guru? Jnana Pradam Guru. Jnana means knowledge, Pradam means to give. So the Guru who has given me this self-knowledge. That Guru, to that Guru, what? Natva. I offer my namaskara. I offer my prayers. So having offered my namaskara to this Guru who has given me knowledge, who is a great yogi and whose name is Vasudevendra, this is the first line. Okay. What does he do? We'll see this first. Tattva bodho bhidiyate. This is basically two words. It breaks here. Tattva bodhaha abhidiyate. Abhidiyate means present or teach or give. Okay, so I am presenting this text called Tattva Bodha, having offered my namaskara to my teacher. So I'm giving you this text. Abhidhiyate. I'm presenting this text. And what is the name of the text? Tattva Bodha. So in the name itself, he has given a brief description. What kind of text is this? This is a Vedantic text that is going to talk about the Tattva Bodha, knowledge about the reality of my own self, knowledge about the true essence, knowledge about the higher truth, knowledge about higher reality. Okay, so he has given a brief description of what he is going to talk about in the name itself. And why is he doing this? Here he has mentioned why he is giving this text. Mumukshu nam hitarthaya. Hitarthaya. Hita means benefit. Hitarthaya means for the purpose of benefiting mumukshus. Who are mumukshus? Those who desire moksha are called mumukshus. Okay, those who desire moksha, the name for those kind of people is mumukshu. So all of us in this class are desirous of moksha, therefore we are mumukshus. So for the benefit of those people who desire moksha, so for the benefit of mumukshus, I am presenting this text called Tattva Bodha. But first, having offered my namaskara to my teacher, Vasudevendra Yogindram. Okay, this is the meaning of the first line. Any questions? No questions?
Ma'am, I'm sorry to repeat. The first one is to resolve any conflicts that may arise in the study, the need for the
Yes.
teacher.
Yes.
Okay,
To
thank you.
resolve any conflicts, the first one. The second is to take the correct meaning of the word, of the Sanskrit word. So to interpret what is written there correctly. Okay, so to give you a funny example, there is a word called aja. Aja, one meaning is unborn, not born, that which is not born, basically. Another meaning of the word aja is goat, the animal goat. So now you see, when they tell you Atma is aja, are you going to take Atma as goat or are you going to take Atma as unborn? Okay, this, in fact, in some, there is some Western author who has translated aja as unborn, and in fact, he has written in his book, Atma is a goat. And then they will laugh, right? They will say, oh, this is such a stupid philosophy. They think Atma is a goat. Not that that is an incorrect statement, but it is not a complete understanding, right?
Not in context.
It's not in context. Okay, and the third reason, and the third reason why to have a teacher is for systematic study. Otherwise, it becomes a haphazard study.
Right.
Yeah.
Medhaji, historical question. Is there an original manuscript of the Tattva Bodha anywhere? Like the oldest manuscript or anything like that?
I don't know. There may be some manuscript, but most of these will be preserved with the acharyas, I assume.
Right.
In any case, whether they have that original piece of paper or not, I don't know. But most of them are taught through oral tradition, right? In the Gurukula, even today, they teach orally. They don't depend so much on paper.
Thank you.
Karam.
Yeah.
In the Tattva Bodha Acharya, was a universal teacher or belong to one particular branch of the interpreters of the Vedantic Vakya?
This is from one of the Shankaracharya lineages.
Oh, that means the followers of another branch may not agree with the Tattva Bodha, that means?
They may not.
Okay.
Medhaji, this all Shrutis are Shrutis only? Coming
Smritis
from
are based on the teaching of Shruti.
Thank you.
It is just a different representation of the same teaching.
Right.
What is Kanchi Parampara?
One of
Very
the,
briefly.
so under the Shankaracharya tradition, there are four, what do you call, mutts, four established mutts by Shankaracharya, where the lineage is maintained and followed. One of them is in Sringeri, one of them is in Puri. There are two more. And the fifth one, which is a little controversial, some people don't accept, is Kanchi.
Okay.
Kanchi is a town in Tamil Nadu. So there the Matha is maintained, and the Kanchi tradition claim that they are also part of the Shankaracharya lineage. The others treat them with respect, but do not accept that they are one of the official, lineages. Little controversy, but in terms of teaching, there is no difference.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. So with this, we have finished the first line of Tattvabodha. And with this, we will be stopping today's class. And from next class, we will be starting the text, the rest of the text. So we can close for the day unless you have any other questions.
One final doubt. For Tattva Bodha, the first and last chanda, what is it called?
Anushtup Chandaha.
I would just want to add what I understood from this is that when the first two lines of the Tattvabodha as we start would not have been possible to understand without you providing so much clarity and discussion. So I can see
Not me,
why
it is
we
Guru Parampara.
yeah. So whoever is for us today, you have a guru, and you learn from somebody else. But if I wanted to learn on my own, I can see how difficult it would be.
Yes.
So
The literal
any
translation
attempt to do
of
that
the
would
text,
be.
Yeah, if you see the literal translation of this line itself, it simply says, having given my namaskara to Vasudevendra, who is a great yogi, I present this text, Tattvabodha, for the benefit of Mumukshu. But what is Mumukshu? Who is Vasudevendra? Who is a guru? All these questions, nobody will explain.
Yes. So I appreciate. Thank you so very much.
Right. So we can stop for the day unless anything else. We still have few minutes.
Vedaji, Tattvabodha is not itself a philosophy. It's a clarification about the terminology or the words or the definitions or the jnana which is explained in the Vedas.
Yes, Tattvabodha is a text based on the Vedantic teaching. And yeah, ideally, we would not even use the word philosophy.
Darshana.
Yeah, Darshana is of course under the Vedanta Darshana, but I'm saying even Vedanta, we do not call as a philosophy. We do not accept the word philosophy. Philosophy means it is open for debate. We don't accept that this is open for debate. Why? Because this is you. This is the most evident thing. This is the most obvious thing in the world. This is the truth. And this statement, for it to make sense, you will have to wait.
Yeah, thank you.
Please guide us how we should thank the Guru who is imparting knowledge for the mumukshus like us.
How to choose a guru? Well, you have to choose somebody whose statements appeal to your intellect. They have to, what they say
I
has
don't
to
mean
be.
that I want to know the Sanskrit word what we should utter at the end of the session to thank our Guru.
Oh, you want to know how to thank the Guru? I didn't understand the question.
What should we say at the end of the session to the Guru in prostrating with the utmost humility and
We
respect
usually
for him?
conclude with Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. My namaskaras to all the gurus of the parampara. Gurubhyo Namaha. It is in plural. We do not ever look at individuality of the Guru parampara.
Thank you.
Right.
So this can be used also at the end of a talk, like the guru or the people say that to the guru, or when is this Sri Gurubhyo Namaha used, ma'am?
Some people use it in the beginning with the starting prayer itself. You can tell at the ending also, with the ending concluding prayer.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will conclude now with the final prayers.
Purnamada Purnat Purnamudachyate
Purnasya
Purnasya
Purnamādaya
Purnamevavasishyate
Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Om Tat Sat. Thank you all and see you next week.
Thank you so much. Om Tat Sat. Thank you.
Om
Thank you.
Tat Sat. Thank you, Vedaji.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Very much, ma'am. Om Tat Sat.
Thank you.